Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, COVID, crisis management, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today, I'm welcoming back for their second, right? Second?
Third.
Third. Oh my goodness. Third appearance. Andrew
It's been a
Ziegler.
while though.
Yeah. Welcome back, Andrew Ziegler. We're going to talk today about, I love this title, Fear and Loathing in the Virtual Office. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
Where'd you get that title, by the way? I just love it.
Well, it's interesting. We'll go into a little bit. It was one of those themes that kind of popped out as I was putting together, the presentation and sort of really thinking through the themes, around this subject. And one of the things that we find, the reasons behind some of this, new dynamic is that fear is a big part of it, and that there's a
Mm,
lot of anger as well that kind of, around the topic of virtual work and employers, forcing people to come back in the office or return to work. There's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anger, and it just kind of came together for me, fear and loathing. And so that's kind of where that title was born from. But it
uh,
catches people attention for sure.
well, it caught mine when I saw it. That's why I reached out and said, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about this," because the title itself, it caught my attention.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about it and how it got started. Because if I recall correctly, it started to do with a poll you did on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this workshop, I actually put it together as a presentation and then developed it into a what I call a keynote conversation workshop that I presented at a couple different national conferences and doing a couple more coming up. It was really based on a poll that I put out on LinkedIn back in February of 2022, and I asked the question, why are managers, leaders hesitant to allow remote work? And I gave three options. Don't trust employees, are not familiar with the technology, less collaboration ability, or other. I guess that there were four options. Well, I was kind of surprised because this question, this poll that I put out there, it went somewhat viral, and I got almost 6,000 votes. But what was more interesting than that was really the 250 or so comments and the conversations that happened within that poll. And quick lesson learned for me that actually was really effective is I went in and I actually responded to a lot of the posts and comments that people made, and that actually triggered even more people to respond and probably more people to see the poll and view and interact. So that was kind of helped out with the whole sort of viral nature of it. So what I did was I took the results of that poll, and more interestingly, the themes and the comments and conversations that happened in that whole exchange over a period of about a week that the poll was out. And that gave me a lot of material and gave me a lot of insight into this workplace dynamics and hybrid work and, leadership view of hybrid work versus employee view of hybrid work, hybrid or virtual work. And that sort of, was the impetus and gave a lot of material to this workshop.
What prompted the poll to start with? Just out of curiosity.
So it's interesting. I've always been, I've been in the virtual workspace. So probably about 15 years ago is the first opportunity I had working for a large bank where I managed a virtual team. I had team members that were in different locations throughout the company, and it was really then that began, that I was exposed to even the concept of virtual work. But it was more, and very quickly I realized that it is a lot more than about virtual management, right? That virtual management that because a lot of times what people think about is what tools, do I have a good enough computer and I need a camera and Zoom and how do I communicate and how do I get my work done? That's all virtual management. And the tools and technology has been out there for many, many years. But virtual leadership is a much different dynamic. How do I motivate people? How do I inspire people? How do I keep employees engaged, right? When I don't see them, or maybe only see them maybe once a year, or the only interaction interaction that we have is over the phone or, on a video conference call. So I've thought about that, and I even did put together presentations and wrote a couple articles on virtual leadership maybe 10, 15 years ago. So it's always been a topic that's been really interesting to me. And when this started to really come up in the lexicon, within many different industries and in the news and the popular media, I've really paid attention to it, because again, I have a long background, long history in this sort of concept of virtual management versus virtual leadership. And that's kind of what prompted the poll, and drew on a lot of that experience and a lot of that information to put together the workshop.
I find some of what you said rather, well, all of it interesting, but a couple of quick points that I thought were interesting. You mentioned Zoom, so Zoom, Teams, and some other things. Those are relatively new applications. They haven't been around for a long time. We used to meet virtually with our counterparts, working for a bank or a manufacturer or whatever, a consulting agency. They were
Mm.
called conference calls.
Yeah.
You know, so we were already working virtually. The camera aspect and all that is kind of relatively new. And
Yeah.
yet, people kind of forget that we did it before. We just did it in a different way.
We've been working virtually or in a virtual environment for, well before even, during the entire industrial age, for over 100 years, pretty much ever since the telephone was invented. If you think back in certain industries, they've been virtual for many, many years. Sales industries, for example, where you're traveling all over the country working with different clients and communicating via email, telephone call,
Mhm.
bridge calls, conference calls, they've been around for dozens of years. This is not new technology. Even Cisco telepresence or WebEx are long time video capable communication vehicles which have been out there. So even that's not necessarily new technology. It really just entered the mainstream within the last few years. And the reason why things like I think why Zoom really took off was because of the ease of use that they have, and really everybody was using it for personal reasons as well. Not necessarily needing a lot of you know um, you know yeah, not really needing any special equipment, communications and things like that. Zoom was just perfectly positioned at just the right time to take
Yeah.
off, and they were scalable and scaled well during the pandemic. So that's why they're pretty much very very dominant force in the industry right now. But you're absolutely right. The video piece is really just one small piece. It's one small addition. It helps to bridge the gap a little bit between being completely virtual and only communicating with somebody via email, versus being in person. It brings you a little bit closer in that you can see the person and pick up a little bit, more of the body language and interact,
Mhm.
personally with somebody. But it's by no means, virtual work and virtual management, it's always been around. It's not really a new concept. I mean, if you think about it, even things like public service, police officers, they're out, in their patrol cars all day long and maybe only back in the station for a couple of hours. There's always been this concept of, most of the jobs that are even still out there don't take place in an office, which is for the most part really the
Mhm.
only virtual capable workplace that we're talking about. And it's really only about 50% of the available jobs that are out there are even potentially remote, office based, remote capable type positions.
Back to the poll,
Yep.
without giving anything away that we're going to talk about later. What, if you can, if you can't, oh
Sure.
well. Um, what was one of the biggest surprises or responses you got from your poll?
Uh, well, I'll give you a quick preview. So the dominant answer out of those four questions that I asked, why are managers and leaders hesitant to allow remote work? So that was the focus. And I realized myself that I had a bias, right? That I was buying into the bias of the leaders are the bad guys, making everybody come back into the office, right? There's something bad about them for not wanting this, because employees clearly want it, managers and leaders don't. And why is that, right? And I asked that question, and out of the four answers, don't trust employees, not familiar with the technology, less collaboration, and other, 53% came down to a matter of trust, right? That they don't trust employees. But when we
Wow.
flip that around and really started to dig into why do employees have that perception? And what are managers and leaders doing to make employees feel that way? It really came down to fear at the end of the day. And so that's really one of those concepts. We'll explore that a little bit later in detail because that's kind of
Mhm.
one of the points of this workshop is really there's a lot of emotion behind this. There's fear, there is anxiety, there is worry, that happens. There's control issues and power hunger and all those kind of things. But at the end of
Mhm.
the day, what this really comes down to is feelings.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of concern, that there's a lot of fear. And at the end of the day, and that's kind of the last part of the whole workshop, we'll cover that in the very beginning, is what do we do about this? And what can we do going forward? And I think you'll be surprised at the answer at, the suggestions that we have and the comments that I've gotten. And after delivering this workshop, it's very interactive and collaborative. What I've heard from a lot of different professionals that are out there about what we can do about this and what we can do, what we can do to try and address this. And it all really has to do with sort of having feelings and having open and honest conversations.
It comes down to people. I've been
It
saying
absolutely
it's
does.
since before Y2K. That's how long I've been around, that it all comes down to people. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, it comes down to people. You
Yeah.
know, Uh,
Absolutely.
with the poll, was there anything that you might have been expecting to see, but was surprising that you didn't see it, or not to the extent you thought you would?
Yeah, actually. So the second option that I had in the poll was lack of familiarity with the technology, and that was only 10%. And I thought that the leaders or managers who would be the most resistant to remote work, right, would be the ones that hadn't already been doing it for a while. That these are, the white shirt and tie, gray haired. I have gray hair too, so I'm not being age. I'm not being ageist here. You can't tell because I'm bald. I'm not being ageist. Where the stuffy executives, right, who just want people in the office and they refuse to use email and they just really don't want to try and adapt and utilize these new technologies. I thought that was going to be a bigger part of it than not only what I got in the poll, but in the responses and in the conversations that happened too. I think it's a small part of it, but wasn't as much as I thought it was going to be. So I was surprised by that answer.
It's interesting you mentioned the stuffy leadership and management there, because you've probably experienced this too. For quite some time, the only people who ever had the ability to work from home were the stuffy managers, on Mahogany Row, who every Wednesday were working from, quote unquote, home,
Mhm,
and had that ability to work remotely all the time. So
mhm.
it's interesting, that that would come up.
Yeah. Yeah,
'Cause
no,
it's,
yeah, exactly. I mean, when you kind of look at it, I was really surprised at that too. Maybe I made some of those assumptions as well, because really when it comes down to it, everybody's kind of looking for that. Everybody's looking for that flexibility. There's really not that much of a difference between employees and leaders, and that was again kind of what was surprising, was how many similarities there were between where both the leaders and the employees were coming from. They're both people at the end of the day, and they want a
Mhm.
lot of the same things.
You've brought up an interesting point now. Again, see, I'm not even following the script here. So, um, do you think that maybe that is part of the challenge we're going to get into? You know what? I'm going to hold it back. I'm going to hold it back because we're going to get
Yeah.
into leadership and stuff later. So I think that'll be the right spot to ask that. Why don't we take a break now? And then we'll jump into employees and how they feel about working remotely. We're talking with Andrew Ziegler today of Fear and Loathing in the Virtual Office, and we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.